Welcome to another episode of Beyond Death, the podcast that aims to demystify things surrounding post-mortem imaging, celebrate pioneers in the field of post-mortem services, and individuals making really exciting moves within the communities that they serve. We've got a very excited episode today, and we're joined by a very special guest, another special guest, and I'm going to hand over to Asanda, who's going to tell us who we're speaking to today. So Asanda, who do we have on our panel today?
Well, David, our next guest is a trained histopathologist. He has a PhD in molecular biology with a special interest in bone biology. He's a reader in pathology at the University of Manchester and a consultant hematopathologist at Manchester Royal Infirmary. His extensive and very impressive resume include being a visiting professor at the Borden Institute of Harvard and MIT in 2003 to 2004. He is chair of the molecular pathology group of the Pathological Society of Great Britain and Ireland, has been a guest lecturer at famed institutes all over the world, and is a reviewer for the Journal of Pathology, Histopathology, British Journal of Hematology, and Journal of Clinical Pathology. He has been involved in the Thameside and Glossop Hospital post-mortem imaging services for over a year, and to top all of that, as if that resume wasn't impressive enough, he has an extensive history of charity work, with some ongoing in Zambia. Welcome, Professor Byers. We are thrilled to have you here, and we look forward to speaking to you today.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David and Asanda, for your very kind introduction. Some of the things, all the things you said about me are true. Some of them are in the past, and some of them relatively a long way in the past. But I at least did all those things at least once. So I am a histopathologist, which means that I study disease, both by looking at bits of patients down the microscope and also by doing autopsy work. I've got a background in science, biology, and did a PhD as part of my training. So I've always really been interested in the process of disease, the diagnosis of disease, and of course autopsies is very much part of that. And I've always had a very strong patient focus and diagnostic focus, which means that probably compared to a lot of my peers, I haven't done as well in research because that's all much more intellectually demanding, and I've got a simple brain.
Yes, it sounds like you told us you started up as a pathologist, and now I believe you also moved on into the autopsy space. Tell us how your day-to-day job is like. What do you do on a typical day?
I've got the luxury of not having any particular typical day. I'm kind of semi-retired now, which means I do everything that I want to do, which is often very varied. But in fact, the way my academic and clinical career has grown over the years is that that's always what I did. Because no such thing as a typical day, but the kind of typical things that I might do in a week would include some diagnostic work, so diagnosing leukemia and lymphoma, for patients who are on the wards and they need to know what type of leukemia or lymphoma they have. Doing autopsy work for either Central Manchester or more recently South Manchester coroner to establish causes of death. I also undertake some teaching. I used to do a lot of undergraduate and postgraduate teaching at the University of Manchester, and now I do online teaching in Zambia, Kenya and other sub-Saharan African countries once a week. And I'm also still involved in some research. I had a long research career, and now I've got a University of Manchester spin-out company developing AI tools to help diagnose lymphoma. So a kind of standard, if you kind of like broke it all down, a standard day would involve a little bit of microscopy work, probably less than a lot of my peers. A reasonable amount of post-mortem work. I do about 4 to 5 post-mortems a week. Some admin and research work around the spin-out company, developing the product and its commercialization, and also managing the teaching project in sub-Saharan Africa.
Gosh, it sounds like you really actually haven't retired then at all, have you? Because you're keeping your
Wow.
very busy.
Yeah, my wife says that I'm not allowed to tell people I'm retired because I'm not. Yeah.
So it's nice to know that you've got, a very varied week. So how does your work with the living differ to the work that you do for post-mortem in the world, in the post-mortem world? How is that different, and how have you had to adapt to the different skills that are required for each of those roles?
Yeah, well, they're very, very different, obviously. So as a pathologist, when I trained, people were required to do both autopsy work and diagnostic microscope work. Now, the college doesn't require people to do autopsy work unless they choose to train in it. And it's been a problem because the number of people who've chosen to do that has dropped dramatically since they allowed that in the last, say, 15 years. So that's why we're facing a real shortage of pathologists to do autopsies. In terms of diagnostic work, most pathologists working in non-specialist centres will diagnose across the whole range of kind of like subspecialties, GI biopsies, breast biopsies, liver biopsies, skin biopsies. In tertiary centres like Manchester University Hospital and other big hospitals, increasingly people subspecialise. So I've subspecialised in hematopathology, which is leukemia and lymphoma. I work very closely with the hematologists. So I'm very specialised there. I just really look at bone marrow biopsies taken for people who may or may not have leukemia or one of the pre-leukemias. So very, very specialised, very high precision kind of diagnostics, lots of different modalities involved, lots of MDT discussion around a lot of the cases. I'm not saying that autopsies are not as precise, but the reality is the threshold of accuracy we need to achieve for a diagnosis for someone who's going to receive chemotherapy is much higher than the threshold of accuracy we need for a post-mortem. My post-mortem work is obviously very physical, much more kind of hands-on than looking down a microscope. And I do, as an anatomically interested person, I'm interested in that aspect of the work. And it covers all of medicine. So, it's not just leukemia and lymphoma. The patient who has died, and they are all patients, they happen to be dead patients rather than live patients, but they're still patients. They could have died of anything. Any type of disease. Could be liver disease, heart disease, kidney disease, brain disease, GI disease, whatever. So I've got to have a very broad range, bring a much broader range of knowledge to that. And then also the threshold of accuracy is simply that we need to establish the cause of death based on the balance of probability. So we need to be at least 50% certain. So the threshold or what we need to, pass to give an answer is lower. That's really the main differences. I probably find the autopsy work more engaging. It's fair to say when I sit down at the microscope, I've got a very low boredom threshold and I quickly find myself shuffling and wanting to do something else, probably much more quickly than a lot of my peers. Consequently, I've become quite fast in my microscope work. When I'm in the autopsy room, it's literally the case that I lose track of time. I can be there for hours, 3, 4, even 5 hours, and the time just passes without me even really noticing. I think it's the work that I probably enjoy isn't the right word because you can't enjoy that kind of work, but it's the work that I find most engaging. Yeah, engaging. And you never know what you're going to find. And you really have to solve the problem yourself, usually. Whereas microscope work, you can discuss it with colleagues, you can do extra tests, you can ask for another biopsy, etc., etc., etc. In the autopsy room, it's largely down to you.
So it sounds like you have got a sort of what one would describe as a good balance between doing work with the living and also doing work with patients who have also died. Now, you also mentioned earlier on that you also did some work outside of the UK. Can you tell us a little bit more about the things that you do outside of the UK?
Okay, so it's almost ancient history now, but I was at the Broad Institute of Harvard and MIT doing some research work there on a sabbatical in the early 2000s, and that did lead to a body of new work developing new techniques for looking at lots of different markers in tissue biopsies at the same time. That work's now pretty mature and people are doing it all over the place, and I've kind of stepped aside from that work. The other work I do internationally now is I've been engaged in an online teaching project which I've set up with colleagues to start with in Zambia, but now the online teaching has spread to all of sub-Saharan Africa and also to India and Malaysia. We have people signing in for that. That grew out of an email I was sent accidentally in 2015 by someone who said, "Hi, Richard, I know you've done teaching in Africa before. Would you like to go out and do some teaching?" So I replied to say, "Well, I think you've got the wrong person, but I'd be very happy to do that teaching. I've never taught in Africa before." I was out in Lusaka in 2015 teaching for a month. That led to me continuing to work with the people there to develop their teaching program in pathology. They now have quite a mature teaching program of their own, but they still require subspecialist input from external speakers. And with money from the British division of the International Academy of Pathology and a charity called ASAP, which is Advancing Strategies for Pathology in Africa, we set up an online teaching program. I've been out to Kenya and Zambia. Well, Kenya twice, Zambia once, going out again in May the second time, to kind of like build rapport with the people there. But really, it's based around online teaching, which I do once a week. I alternate it between me teaching once a week and an external speaker teaching once a week, and people that I approach are very, very happy to contribute. So we have between 30 to 60 people from across Africa signing in each week. It's an ongoing teaching program. I provide that for free, but really doesn't cost anything and doesn't really take much time. That's probably the most rewarding work I've done in all my career. When I went to Zambia in 2015, there were 2 pathologists for the entire country. And there was a teaching program which had been sponsored by UK Department for Foreign International Development. That was teaching a kind of like cadre of young pathologists. I was engaged in that teaching program. They are all now in place and they're all consultants. And now they're providing the teaching for the young pathologists. But I'm still engaged in that program because they still want some external support for specialist teaching. And it's just amazing to have seen within the space of less than 10 years, a country that basically had virtually no pathology service. There was a turnaround time for surgical specimens of 6 months or more. There was basically no pathology provision in the country, certainly nothing outside the capital at all. And now it's still relatively primitive compared to our country, but they have a pathology service with people spread all over the country. And I've managed to get to support a pathologist from there to get a training fellowship to come to this country. So Edgar Shalika is presently in this country training in hematopatholgy for a couple of months on a fellowship. And he works in the periphery of Zambia. So that's probably been the best thing I've ever done, apart from, in fact, engagements in the Virtopsy project. And I'm not just saying this because I'm on this podcast, but, you know, in terms of where I've actually made a contribution or where I can see a real change step in the way things are done, most of the research I did, it was interesting and I worked very, very hard on it. It was intellectually quite demanding, but did it actually change the world? Probably not. Whereas it's often the simpler things, in a way, that really make a change. And the Virtopsy project is already making a massive change. Yeah.
Wow. Just hearing the work you're doing, that's an incredible legacy that you leave behind. One of our questions to our guests is, what are you most proud of? And I think you've answered it perfectly there. Really, really impressive. I have a question for you next, which is, you alluded to earlier the shortage of pathologists in the UK. And one question is, how do you expect your role to evolve over the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, hopefully I'll actually stop working in the next 5 or 10 years. But I think that's unlikely given my past record, and my wife would say the same. I think the role of pathologists is everyone says pathologists, we don't need pathologists anymore. We've got molecular, we've got imaging. We don't need people to look at tissue biopsies anymore. The reality is we still do need people to look at tissue biopsies in different ways. So I think in terms of the microscope work, a lot of the diagnoses that are being made now require a lot of molecular testing, and some of the things that we used to do are not required anymore. But a lot of the molecular testing is being integrated into the diagnostic, into the tissue biopsy work. So we'll still need people to look down microscopes. There'll be a lot more digital pathology. There'll be a lot more AI being used in pathology. I think the AI may be well used as a triage tool, so in things like breast biopsies and GI biopsies and prostate, they'll use AI to screen out the easy, low-hanging fruit and free up the pathologist to do the more demanding work. In terms of autopsy work, there's different models for the use of Virtopsies around the country. Some regions are very heavily Virtopsy based and hardly any invasive PMs. I think there'll probably be about a 50-50 split. I think that we are beginning to get pathologists come through training in autopsies finally. I don't think they'll be sufficient to mop up the people who are dropping off the end of the list, like including myself, in not too distant future, I guess. But there'll be enough to provide a service where more is done by Virtopsies. I think there'll be a strong collaboration between radiologists and pathologists in discussing cases, seeing what cases can be reported virtually, or not virtually, but by Virtopsy, because it's not virtual, it's a thing, and which can be done invasively. So there'll be a greater mix. I don't think pathologists are dead as a breed. I think that, the bottom line is, clinicians do not want to give chemotherapy or chop something off someone until they got a really firm tissue diagnosis as far as possible. And pathologists will continue to provide that. Increasingly, we're getting lots of small biopsies because radiological kind of sampling of tumours and so on is becoming much, much more sophisticated. Those small biopsies are much harder to examine, actually. There's a lot more analysis needs to be done, choosing pieces of tissue for molecular analysis. So pathologists, the skill mix will change. They'll become more an integrator of analyses rather than just doing one. Well, I see that very closely in hempath, which always leads the field. I think because it's in blood, it's easier to do things in it, but it always leads the field, hempath. And we provide integrated diagnostic reports for every single patient. So every single patient, I do the microscope bit, someone else does the aspirate, someone else does the flow and the molecular, and then next generation sequencing and so on. And they're all put together into a single final integrated report, which is reported out usually by a hematologist. But I think in all the other subspecialties like breast, prostate, GI, the same thing will develop. And it'll be the pathologist signing out the integrated report, tying it all together. So I think the work will become more diverse, more interesting. Some of the easier stuff will be delegated out to either AI, which then just needs to be verified. Yeah, we agree it is. Or kind of advanced practitioners for cut-up and things like that, for dissection, to free up pathologists for particular roles. So it's going to be a broad mix. I think it's a very exciting time. And that's kind of why I'm still working in a way, because I've always been interested in digital pathology. I've always been interested in post-mortems. I've always been interested in teaching. And a lot of the things which I've spent my entire career waiting to come to fruition are now actually bubbling up. So it's nice to be connected with them at least for another 5 years, maybe, rather than, I wasted all my time for that. And now someone else is doing it.
My next question would be, what do you think is a common misconception about your job? The most
everyone thinks that we're really weird people who sit in the dark and just deal with dead people. That's the most common. Most people do not want to. If you say you're a pathologist, that's usually a bit of a conversation killer. The reality is, the majority of pathologists don't go anywhere near a dead person, and a lot of the, particularly the more recently trained pathologists, don't want to go anywhere near one. I think pathologists have got a bit of a reputation of being socially awkward, not terribly good communicators. I think these things are all untrue. There are many people across all specialties who are poor communicators or good communicators. It may be that people in pathology are maybe a little shyer than average if you look across the range, but that's certainly not the case. I like a bit of peace and quiet, but I'm not shy. I think that pathology has had a really bad reputational image, and I think the organ retention scandal, and I'm not defending pathologists, but there was some ambiguity in the tissue retention laws around the time of that scandal. People obviously took that very, very far. That didn't do us any favours either, but the reality is you cannot run a hospital without a pathology service. If you take pathology out of the service, it will just stop. No one gets their biopsies reported, no one knows what disease anyone's got, no one knows what anyone died of. People cannot be buried. It is as every part of the hospital is a critical part. I do miss patient contact, but I don't miss it that much. I'm obviously quite good at what I do, and there's a real need for able and interested people to do pathology, because if you haven't got good pathology, you haven't got a good service. Interestingly, this whole Africa project developed from a really great guy called Ken Fleming in Oxford. He was a pathologist in Oxford. He had a long-standing, very highfalutin, sophisticated research career in renal disease, and he was at a meeting somewhere abroad. And he was speaking to a professor of surgery, and he said, "So what's the most important thing for you in surgery, in your hospital?" He said, "The 3 Ps. I can't remember what one of the Ps was, but one of them was pharmacy and one of them was pathology." He said, "What do you mean, pathology?" He said, "Well, we haven't got any pathology. We don't know we just know it's a lump, and we take a guess." So Ken Fleming is the guy who set, he needs the credit for setting this whole program up, because he went to the UK Department of, Foreign International Development and got a large amount of money. I'm a small fry, but a large amount of money to set the project up and to start teaching people in Zambia, because no pathology, no diagnosis, and substandard at best treatment, really. And obviously, that's the case in this country, where people have their biopsies delayed because of shortage of pathologists. But it's just a continuum of the same trend when you extend it out to somewhere like Zambia, where there's no pathology, so there's no diagnosis, and it's whatever it's just a guesswork on behalf of the clinicians. That's a short answer to saying I think pathology is really important. I think it's really fascinating. Yes, we do take a bit of a bad rap for being pathologists. I guess radiologists are slightly in that camp as well, but less so. But it's extremely important, so I'd always encourage people to go into it. And I anything I can do to make it seem more attractive and more acceptable would be better.
One more question, and this is more in the post-mortem imaging, which seems to be slowly but surely, as you said, bubbling to the surface. And what do you see in terms of post-mortem imaging usage, maybe in the NHS and moving forward? Is that going to push out the pathologist? Are they going to have a different role than they have now? What do you think regarding post-mortem imaging?
Well, it depends. Different parts of the country have got different. So post-mortem imaging actually started in Manchester, I should say. My colleagues, Dr. Bembo and Dr. Roberts, who has been in Oxford for many years now, they're the ones who started it off in the early 1990s, actually. But then Ian moved to Oxford, and Ian really took the mantle of developing it as a kind of like new specialty. In Oxford, I think that almost all the PMs are done. Almost all the examinations are done by Virtopsy, but there's a pathologist in charge. I think in Preston, again, very high reliance on Virtopsy, and it's the radiologists that are in charge. Manchester's a bit behind the curve, having been an early starter those years ago. In Tameside, I just heard data today that there's a third of the cases this year so far have been done by Virtopsy, and the local coroner and the radiologist, Natasha, who's set up the service, they're very keen for the pathologist to remain at least, central, if not in control of the overall pathology process. Will it push pathologists out? Well, you could say that in some parts of the country it has pushed pathologists out. I don't think that it's a good model where you do, because I think that there are cases where you simply have to look inside the body with your naked eye and take samples and so on. So I don't think that overall, if it's run as it should be, it's going to replace pathologists. Would I be worried if it did replace pathologists? Well, the bottom line is what's important at the end of the day is providing a service to the coroner, society and the families, and therefore by inference the deceased patients. So whatever's good for them is good, and if it can be done virtually rather than with an invasive post-mortem, then fine. I don't mind getting pushed out. Yeah, but I don't think it will. I think that the people who do post-mortem examinations will in the future work quite closely with the people doing the Virtopsies, and I do quite a lot of reviewing of cases in conjunction with Natasha where a radiologist is uncertain of the cause of death. So I think it'll be mixed.
I think you mentioned earlier on that you are also very heavily involved in artificial intelligence. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you think that will impact your role, first of all, and also how do you think that will impact how things might happen, not just in the UK, but also outside of the UK with the work that you are involved in?
Yeah, so one of my colleagues said it's not artificial intelligence because it's not artificial and it's not intelligent. But anyway, it's deep learning. Basically, what we do is we teach something to recognize something. It's as simple as that. It's a field which is, again, it's taken a long time to come to fruition because it relies on large amounts of high quality digital images for the training. It also relies on widespread uptake of digital pathology to provide images for diagnostic use so that it's got some, platform to work on in the NHS or other kind of like economies. And also like just the computing power and computing algorithms. So they've all kind of come together now. And now we have a situation where digital pathology, kind of like scanning of slides and reading them on a screen is becoming quite commonplace. Different kind of adoption rates in different parts of the country, but it's all moving very strongly towards digital pathology. Some parts of the country are completely digitized, others are lagging behind a bit. We're a bit of a laggard as well, but we're getting there. It's not going to replace pathologists because they're triage tools. It's a bit like, you don't fly a plane without a pilot, even though they can fly themselves now. And a bit like, using radiology AI to, diagnose suspected strokes. Still got to be reviewed by a neuroradiologist. So I think it will remove uncertainty, because it'll get, so our tool, which is published, so I can talk about it, we've got a tool which will look at lymphomas and say whether a lymph node is reactive or lymphomatous with a stated confidence kind of score. And then a district general hospital can just say, yeah, this is reactive. We don't need to send it in for review. Or, yeah, this is a lymphoma. It needs to go to the specialist service because that's what NICE guidance requires. And I think that same model will pertain across other specialties, breast core biopsies, prostate biopsies. It'll be able to say these ones are 98% certain that I think they're normal or reactive, or these are the ones you need to look at. So people might look at the ones where it's not neoplastic, faster, so to improve throughput. And there is a strong confidence score that people can rely on. You might say, oh, well, how can you rely on a confidence score because you're only 95% certain? Well, a pathologist looks down the microscope is probably only 95% certain as well. And 5% error is within biological variation. I think that the AI tools are definitely going to be implemented in a lot of digital pathology. You could argue that there isn't really any much role for digital pathology without augmenting it with AI, because all it does is you've still got to have a microscope scan the slides. You've still got to keep the slides. Then you've got to pay for massive storage, digital storage space, which has obviously got a carbon footprint as well. So all it's doing is increasing cost and increasing storage and doing roughly the same thing, just you can move the images around a bit easier. The real advantage of digital pathology is where you can put some AI on the top to really streamline your workflow, identify cases that need to be dealt with more quickly, identify all the cases that are probably reactive or normal and can be removed, and that will make a big difference going forward.
It sounds like you're doing, like I said, amazing work, but like we said, at the end of everything, we've got patients and their families, and you're giving them the answers through the amazing work that you're doing, and hopefully we can see AI as an adjunct to all of this. So I guess the final question I would like to ask you, Professor Byers, then is, what's next for you?
I've no idea. I don't know. I guess I'll carry on doing the same things that I've done until they reach their conclusion. I would actually like to, not stop work, but work less, because I'm not as young as I used to be. But I think I will always remain interested in pathology and medicine and helping people. And I'm sure that another opportunity will come my way. What that is, I don't know. I think I love doing the autopsies, but I think it'll probably be time in the next few years to pass that on to someone else. Hopefully another cohort has come through. The AI company, I hope, will be mature and on its feet. The teaching in Africa, hopefully I'll have passed that on to other people. I'm very much one who wants to develop things and then pass them on to other people. First of all, because I get bored. And secondly, because that's the way you sustain things long term. I don't want anything just to rely on me. I'd just like to, go out and spend time riding my bike and running on the hills. I don't think it's entirely going to happen. I might travel the world more doing pathology, teaching. I haven't got another big idea, but I'll keep an open mind.
Watch this space then, I guess.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Professor Byers, for your time. It has been a beautiful experience for us. We've learned so much from your experiences, and we hope our listeners as well have also learned a lot from these experiences, and we cannot wait to see what is next for you. But thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for sharing the amazing work that it is that you do. This may be the end of our conversation with Professor Byers, but it's certainly not the end of the discussion surrounding what matters beyond death.